The Day Billy Fell Off the Cliff by Byron Broussard. The Day Billy Fell Off the Cliff, Part 8. Billy stood in a flaming cottage over a crying, squirming being that was half flaming man and half skeleton. "I'm waiting, Jessica. What's a proper greeting?" "Why don't we go back to the dark place for a second? There's so many little things." Her response made Billy feel a strange sickness in his head, like a dizzy bat runner. "I don't feel like being flabbergasted." As he was speaking, his body moved in a new way, by a voice in my own head. Billy had a sword in his hands, and the being on the cottage floor began to look more flaming skeleton than flaming man. Billy could feel his mind putting a grip around Jessica. "Oh, Billy, permission to be frank?" Billy's grip loosened. "I get that I'm in no position to ask you to do anything, but for me to teach, I'd either have to talk you through from where I left off, or we go and cover the basics in the black." It seemed as if she took a breath here. Same goes for knowing what I have to offer. Hearing the story from me will fill a picture more than reading the book of my life. As for the proper greeting you asked for, I say you eat this dopey bastard so I can teach you a thing or two about cohabitation. Billy looked at the crying skeleton that was attempting to shrink into the floor. "Tell me about the sword, Jessica." "You're the driver," she said in a way that said she didn't think he was ready for the answer. "The sword is a sword. We all have them. We also have other things. Perhaps you would like to know that your physical back has a compartment that works like magic. You can reach that sword behind you and let go, and poof, it's back inside. In the same way, you can reach behind you thinking of the sword, and poof, there you have it." Billy reached the sword behind himself and it went into his pack. He stepped towards the flaming skeleton, trying to find it in him to consume it. "I can't do it," he said to Jessica. Then he closed his eyes and went into the black of self-reflection. Billy could see the image of Jessica sitting at a desk with paper spread around. There was a chalkboard that seemed to float in the darkness. Written on the board on the top was the word paths, and below was a vertical line splitting the board in two. The right side said the basics, and the left side said my story. The left side read, "My story." Jessica looked at Billy with big, unblinking eyes. "Where would you like to start, Billy? Know that starting one place will change the other's lessons and value. Know that starting one place will change the other's lesson and value. If you learn the basics before you learn my story, I may not survive this. If you learn my story before you learn the basics, you stand a fair chance of getting lost." She made a sort of half smile and shrugged. "This tells me plenty about you. I could probably guess your story. I've been a little reserved so I can make mistakes without getting lost, like you say. I've seen the self-dug fire pits that the skeletons end up in, and the term getting lost reminds me of them." The image showed Billy going up to Jessica and then to the board. Billy's image took the chalk and drew an X over her paths. "Tell me about your first day here. What did you do? How did you get here? And how long has it been?" Jessica's image spun around in the desk chair and she relaxed. "The middle path. You passed the bed I placed with myself." Jessica's image stood up and waved her hand. The desk and the board disappeared and they were back in the flaming coffee shop. "I used to spend a lot of time here. Do you know where we are, Billy? Some say it's hell." "Some say hell, and others say other things." Image His images of the landscape flashed across the booth table. Billy stayed silent. I don't think this is hell, Billy. I've been here a while. You lose track of time really fast here, but there are other ways to count. Jessica paused. Billy realized he was supposed to respond. I don't much care where it is we are. My death was pretty questionable, but this is about you and how what you know can help me here and now. Jessica's image showed a crooked smile. I died of an overdose at age 38. I appeared here in one of these god-awful cottages. Images showed Jessica in a cottage opening her eyes in a panic. She ran out of the cottage, making motions similar to the fire dance ritual Billy saw the skeletons do. I was angry when I first got here. I spent a lot of my first days with my sword in my hand. Billy could see an image of Jessica standing in between the cottages with her sword. She was burning a bright red color and yelling into the sky. The intensity of her yell was present in all the surrounding fire. Flaming men and women began to appear from around the sides of cottages as if drawn to the disturbance. I want to tell you that this place doesn't hold grudges or judgments, but the judgments and grudges end up completely internal. I had to come to terms with what I did here and on Earth in my own time. Never did I meet a flaming beast, person, or skeleton that shamed me for any of my decisions. The image of Jessica standing in between the cottages looked up at Billy. Well, they didn't shame me until after I consumed them, and even then, for a while, I considered their voices my own guilt. The image said before putting her head down and gripping her sword. Jessica's image stopped yelling and looked around in a way that portrayed skill and purpose. 3 flaming men had stepped out of the cover of the cottages, and they looked at Jessica in wonder. Billy could see in the image that 2 flaming men stood. Billy could see in the image that 2 flaming men still stood in the shadow, and there were 2 flaming women behind Jessica, watching from the doorway of a cottage. Billy thought of the title of Jessica's book and assumed she was about to earn the warrior title. I earned that title many times over my life and death, Billy. I'd like to say that I'm showing you the extremes, but this is really how I spent my first moments here. The image of Jessica sprang into action. She ran between the cottages to the first guy out in the open. He was standing looking defenseless a few feet away from the other 2 guys. Jessica was a few paces away from the first flaming guy when she locked eyes. Jessica was a few paces away from the first flaming guy when she locked eyes and made a swift slice of the sword from bottom right to top left. There was a pause that seemed to be a relay of information, and then the flaming man's body split in 2. Flame spewed from the wounds like water escaping a high-pressure container. 2 guys to Jessica's left each took a step back as Jessica consumed the remains of the first flaming guy. She did it in one bite. Both pieces of the guy were gone in a gulp, and she was running towards a cottage to her right in the next second. She headed straight for the flaming man that was there in the shadows he mistook for cover. Jessica consumed him like a crazed animal, catching the flaming man with her hands and shoving pieces of him into her mouth. When she had finished consuming her second victim, one of the 2 guys pulled out his sword. Billy could see that the flaming man held the sword in a defensive stance. The image of Jessica looked at the flaming man and began to produce an audible laughter. Jessica faced the flaming man with the sword. She noticed that the other flaming man had yet to draw his weapon. And then she noticed the two flaming women watching from the cottage door. The flaming ladies appeared to be on the verge of turning to skeletons. They cowered away from the sight of Jessica too late. Jessica made her way to the cottage with her sword hanging from her right hand. She grabbed the flaming lady that looked most like a skeleton and threw her down to the coal-like ground. The flaming woman fell to her hands and knees between Jessica and the flaming man with the sword in the spaces between cottages. With a spin to the left and sword coming down swiftly in her right hand, Jessica beheaded the flaming woman. Jessica then went into the cottage and brought out the other flaming woman in front of her in a classic hostage chokehold. The hold lasted enough time for the flaming men to see Jessica's sword plunge through the flaming woman's chest. Jessica kicked the woman off her sword onto the headless corpse, then consumed them both slowly. By this time, both flaming men who were left had their swords in the offensive stance. They seemed willing to attack, but at the same time not ready. Jessica playfully tossed her sword in her left hand. She held it tipped down and almost dragged it as she walked towards the two flaming men. They spread out and let her get between them. Jessica stood open with the two flaming men to the left and right of her. Both flaming men yelled and were on the attack. Billy could see a bird's eye view. Jessica stood flaming with her sword held low in her left hand. Jessica raised her sword and blocked a high swing from the man on the left. Almost at the same time, she dodged to the left to escape a gut-height swing of the blade from the man on the right. She turned towards the right at the extent of her dodge and lunged at the flaming man. Jessica's sword went through his heart, and to Billy it looked like a fencing technique. Jessica kicked out her left leg, continuing the momentum of her movements, and struck the other man. As the kick sent the flaming man a few steps back, Jessica quickly removed her sword and consumed her victim. Billy could see flames spilling out of Jessica's gut in a line that spread halfway around her stomach. The man she just consumed had reached her with his blade, and the other man stood with confidence. Jessica put her free hand to her wound, and her fire turned a bright red. She ran towards the flaming man with her sword in her left hand and her right hand on her gut. It seemed as if she had no form, just a rush to get somewhere. The flaming man ran to meet her with his sword held low and ready. They were almost sword's distance. The flaming man had his sword low and to the right and ready to strike out or defend. Jessica held her sword in her left hand with a loose grip that bounced with her footfall. Then Jessica made a wide step to the right, catching the flaming man's sword tip in hers and swinging it towards her and around while closing the distance. The swords looked like a collapsing jump rope as they made a big elaborate circle, and the two got closer to each other. The flaming man's right arm was extended to his right, with his sword being pushed by Jessica's, and before he could change the momentum to strike, Jessica leaned in and bit his head off. Jessica leaned in and bit off his head. She then consumed the rest of him and ran off between the cottages with her sword in her hands. She had gotten much hairier. Her fire was a dark red. You lose shame, you become the beast, right? Have you ever become the beast? The image went back to the coffee shop booth. Yes and no for both questions. Her image turned her head to look away. I did not fully become the monster, or maybe I did. It's hard to say, but I did not fully become the monster, or maybe I did. It's hard to say because not much changes other than the way other beings here treat you. They're all masks, Billy said to no one. I think the beast mask grows with your sense of belonging, Jessica told Billy, but also with your shedding of humanity. Jessica's image looked up from the booth, and she seemed to be asking for Billy to pass judgment. They're all masks, Billy told her. Billy turned the self-reflection to darkness and visualized the change his body would take. Billy's intuition filled in the gaps in Billy's knowledge. The image showed a flaming man and woman standing side by side. One was Billy, and the woman looked familiar. The body stood with limbs outstretched, slowly turning as if on a pedestal. You got a weird, quick way of putting things together, Billy. I dig it. Thanks for not being a bumbling moron. I could have been consumed by worse. The two flaming people spun slowly so that Billy could examine his body characteristics. They changed from skeletons to humans to beasts, all flaming in slightly different versions of red. Are you a good judge of character? Yeah, Jessica responded. I'm no body language reader, but I know an as from a coward from a hero, and I know a warrior when I see one. The self-reflection image was showing Jessica in the booth again. Good. You mentioned bumbling morons. I want you to think real hard about if you have ever met or known of a winged beast that was a bumbling moron. Jessica's face scrunched up with dislike. It sounds like a trick question, she said quietly. It's a request. I still have no contact with the flying beasts. You're actually one of the first beings I've met here. Tell me about your interactions with the flaming beasts, please. Billy made his inner voice sound pleading, and an image of him appeared next to Jessica in the flaming coffee shop. The image of him looked at the image of her with its hands open. No tricks, just small, specific requests, Billy said. So, there aren't many of them around, Jessica started. I learned through secondhand information and other people's memories that at one time there was a war between the humans and the beasts that the humans won. Billy started to see the image of a tree graph filled with balls of light that represented information passing through the lines. As the tree went up, the lines began to converge, and as they got bigger, they seemed to consume other lines. Sometimes a smaller line would be consumed by a big line of the tree, but even so, the big line still existed and connected below. What's this? Looks like an upside-down tree, Jessica asked, surprised at the image. You mentioned secondhand information and other people's memories. Have you consumed anyone you found noteworthy or remarkable, such as you? Jessica's image stood next to the light tree. I did consume an old hero turned bully, but I think we should discuss how all the memories and voices inside your head works. Jessica's image glanced at the tree. Why? Billy asked in a grave voice. There was a short silence. And then Billy said, Don't limit me, Jessica. Just tell me about your hero. We'll get to know how you got the information later. Billy allowed the black of self-reflection to show the image of the coffee shop again. Jessica sat in the booth looking a bit on edge. Her image had a cup of coffee. Rayar was the name of the flaming man who helped the humans beat the beast at the end of the war. He was an excellent warrior with a fiery passion. Her image took a sip of coffee. He was called Rayar because when in battle his yell was heard like a name you'd you do not soon forget. Like a name you'd not soon forget. In his later days, when he was showing some bones, he would only call his name out in self-pity and frustration. Still before killing, though. Her image looked up for a second before taking another sip. I bet that since I have consumed you, you have yet to look inside yourself. Billy exited the black of self-reflection and opened his eyes to hear the campfire and crying skeleton. It's not your lucky minute, my man, Billy thought. Well, it was. It's not your lucky minute, my man, Billy thought. Well, it wasn't, then it was, and now it isn't again. Billy ate the cowering, flaming man alive in one slow bite. He imagined that it must have looked like when a snake eats. Ah! Billy's head was filled with screaming, and the voice that he assumed belonged to the flaming man he just consumed. Jessica? Billy called out. I'll have you know that as soon as this guy Rick started yelling, I went and spent a lifetime as an image in my own self-reflection heaven. The voice in Billy's head was still crying out. You're welcome, Jessica. Now, help me with Rick. Billy kept his eyes open so that the sound of the campfire competed with the sound of the yelling. You have the ability to silence Rick, kind of like when you grabbed me earlier. You can also take him into your self-reflection and possibly salvage some sense of sanity, but that takes effort. You can also toss him into your backpack like you do with your sword. Billy silenced Rick with his intention. Can he still hear us like this? Billy asked Jessica. I'm not sure. Billy silenced Jessica with the same intention. Billy walked out of the cottage. Billy walked out of the cottage and looked into the sky at the yellow star with his lonely wind blowing. I bet niggas go crazy from the impulse decisions that lead to overwhelming, overcomplicated realities. I bet niggas go crazy from impulse decisions that led to overwhelming, overcomplicated realities. Jessica consumed a whole group of people at once when she first got here, and depending on her inner dialogue at the time, the screams and pleas may end up convincing a person they are just in hell. Billy walked into another cottage off to the far right. It was empty, and Billy went in and closed the door. He sat on the floor and released Jessica from her silence. He then went into the black of self-reflection. Billy could see the image of the flaming coffee shop, and Jessica's image was sitting in the booth with her hands folded like she was waiting for something. I see what I am to you, Billy. Psychological torture is still torture, and you better understand that. She didn't sound threatening, and Billy could appreciate the self-restraint she was showing. So, could you still hear me? What's it like being silenced? Jessica's image stood up and paced back and forth calmly. Nothing changed for me, but I could tell that you couldn't hear me after a while. Kind of felt like when I first got here. Her image sat back down. No change. Didn't expect that, but that does lead me to believe that this world is about me. Jessica made a face that Billy could translate to fear. I feel like I'm training a future flying monster, she said to herself. I want you to know that I do not mean to offend you, Jessica. Billy's image sat in the booth across from her. I am all I have, really. Jessica's eyes widened, and then her image disappeared as Billy put her back on silence. The whole flaming coffee shop disappeared, and then Billy let her out of the silence again. The coffee shop was back, and Jessica's image was still in the booth. Did you space out just now? I got a weird feeling. Jessica's image tilted her head in curiosity. I feel like your learning is about to surpass mine, and you still have yet to take very many actions. Billy could see his image in the booth across from her, with its fingers crossed and secrets on its lips. This life is getting complicated, Jessica. Let's go over what we can do with Rick. Jessica's image moved out of the coffee shop booth, and the image disappeared. She walked with a cup to what looked like a projector screen. I think he works best with visual examples, she said to Billy in a questioning manner. Well, Billy sighed, just try and explain the benefit of having his presence. The feelings that lead to your consumption, the feelings that led to your consumption were almost instinct. The black of self-reflection went dark and Jessica's image stood there looking out. Well, you could look through his book. The last pages are the catalog of this place. Rick here is mostly a crying skeleton, so I doubt he'll have much of anything good to share. Well, you could look through his book. The last pages are the catalog of this place. Rick here is mostly a crying skeleton, so I doubt he'll have much of anything good to share. Jessica clasped her hands together. I see how you're going at this. You want to beat the game. You think we are here doing things to reach an end. Billy made a mental gesture towards Rick, and the image of his book appeared in the darkness of self-reflection. The book was titled Rick the Pathfinder, and it opened up towards the end where Rick's first days in the afterlife began. I'm a little afraid the book will be better for you than the story told aloud, Jessica told him inside his head. Her image was not visible, and Billy understood she was being polite while they read.